Hello. So, dear SUSNANO colleagues, I'd like to welcome you to Module 3 of my training on Horizon Europe Project Lifecycle. This time with this module, we're going to be focusing on the execution and control phases and the closing phases of Horizon Europe projects. So, this is the agenda that I have. As you can see, it's very much focused on this execution and control phase. Over the course of the next 35 or so slides, I'm going to try and draw upon a lot of my own personal experience with running not only Horizon Europe projects, but projects from its predecessors, Horizon 2020, FP7, 7th Framework Program, even going before that, the 6th Framework Program, FP6. So I'll be talking about a sort of kickoff meeting checklist. All these projects have important kickoff meetings, so I'll be talking about things to think about for that. I'll also say some words about my advice to regular online project meetings about doing action item lists reviews. I'll talk about deliverables, milestones, publications in the context of Horizon Europe. I'll say some words about knowledge management, dissemination, communication, exploitation. Then, because it's such an important part of these projects, what are called the periodic reviews, that typically take place around the midterm of the project and at the end of the project with the European Commission and with reviewers that they appoint. I'm going to talk about, yes, these periodic reviews from the point of view of occurrence, purpose, and reporting. Something called the Part B technical report. I'll talk about financial reporting. I'll talk about the actual project review meeting itself that you'll usually have with the project officer at the European Commission and the reviewers. I'll then say some words about budget flexibility in the context of these projects. And then the last sort of sections will be about grant amendments. So often, I mean, not always, but often projects have to undergo some sort of formal changes or amendments. And I'll talk about the reasons for making such amendments. And then I'll sort of talk about two specific cases, arguably the most common ones. Firstly, the withdrawal of a consulting partner, extending the project duration. And then lastly, I'll then move on to section 2 about the closing phase, which is mainly about some recommendations about things to consider at the end of a Horizon Europe project. Now, just to remind you, so in these two arrow figures that you see on the right, as I believe I mentioned already in a previous training under module 2, look, these phases, it's not always so, when you go from one phase to another, it's not always so black and white. It's not like from one day to the next, you necessarily switch from one phase to the other. And in fact, you can quite often have situations where you're still, say, completing activities in one phase while starting activities in another. So, for example, in the case of the execution and control phase and the closing phase, there's certainly a degree of overlap, and this is normal. And don't get necessarily worried that you're doing one thing from a new phase while still completing others in another phase. Anyway, let's get started. So, execution and control phase. Let's talk first of all about kickoff meeting checklists. So, kickoff meetings. These are, important events. It's almost certainly the first time where all the consulting partners hopefully are together face to face. And some of them may not have met before, so there's a chance for that. It's also a chance to explain a lot of the important rules and regulations around these kinds of projects. So anyway, this is a kind of, if you like, my kind of checklist that I would recommend. So Number one, project overview and objectives. So make sure during that kickoff meeting that there are presentations made where you review the project goals, the expected impacts, and key deliverables, and make sure that partners are aligned on terms of the scope, timelines, and intended outcomes of the project. During this kickoff meeting, it's also a chance, of course, to clarify consortium roles and responsibilities. So you should clarify each partner's contributions. It's really important. What you want to make sure is that each partner takes ownership for their responsibilities. They take ownership for their tasks, their work packages. You should clarify what the communication channels are, clarify the decision-making processes described in the consortium agreement. So if a partner working a work package has some particular problems, they should understand that they get in contact with, for example, the work package leader. They don't necessarily have to go straight to the coordinator. It all depends on the communication channels that you define. Work packages and milestones. So what I strongly recommend is that during this kickoff meeting, each work package leader presents their work package and tasks. Again, it's really important that each work package leader takes clear ownership for their work package. And when they do their presentation, what you want to expect from them is to discuss in concrete terms what their work activities will be for the first 6 to 12 months in relation to deliverables and milestones and so forth. And then fourthly, listed here, financial administrative rules. So it's important to review the funding allocation and explain eligible costs and reporting requirements, and ensure good understanding of the grant agreement and consortium agreement where they can access those documents. Now in the top right in the corner, I've got this large yellow star. And it says here, well before the project officially starts, e.g. already during the contract negotiations, in other words, the grant agreement preparation process, remind the academic partners to recruit their PhDs/postdocs on time. So yeah, this, from my years of experience, this is often a problem, often an issue that, for example, if a project starts on the 1st of January in a given year, I often find that the academic partners, the universities, etc., they haven't recruited their PhDs and postdocs on time, that they're late. And part of the problem is they just don't, it's not the only reason, but oftentimes it's just that they don't start their internal procedures early enough. So if I'm a project coordinator, and I've submitted a proposal, as soon as I get that welcome letter from the Commission saying that we've been invited for contract negotiations, in other words, we've been selected for funding, I would already at that point, as well as obviously telling the good news to my consortium partners, to the academic partners, I would be saying, come on, you need to get started with your own procedures, internal procedures for hiring PhDs, postdocs, or put them on the spot and say, what is that procedure? Who do you need to speak to? And don't just leave it at that. Make sure you follow up every few weeks to say what's going on. Make them accountable. I'm not saying if you do this approach, you guarantee that there won't be any problems, but you certainly help to minimize problems with minimize the risk of late recruitment. Other things that you want to cover in this kickoff meeting, this sort of checklist. So risk management and contingency plan, review list of critical risks and propose mitigation measures that are in the grant agreement, establish some sort of monitoring process to resolve issues. Number 7, ethics, data management, and open science. So discuss ethical compliance and data protection measures, review open access requirements and dissemination plans for, say, research results, research publications. With regard to communication dissemination strategy, review the project's communication dissemination exploitation plan that's documented in the grant agreement. Identify concrete activities for the first 6 months, in other words, events, social media, creating a project website, etc., all this kind of thing. And then lastly, next steps and action points. Summarize any key decisions and responsibilities. discussed in the meeting. Make sure you set dates for the next meetings and reporting deadlines. So those are some recommendations there about kickoff meetings. What about sort of regular online project meetings? So you've had the kickoff, now the project's running. From the perspective of the project coordinator, what would I recommend? So personally, I recommend having weekly online meetings and to do these on the same day, same time, and to review the project's action item list. I say this because if you do this, regular weekly meetings become a habit. The partners don't need to think what day time it will be at. If you only do the meeting every few months, people start saying, "Oh, we need to set up a good doodle poll and this and that." And it's like, no, forget it. Let's keep it simple. We'll do it weekly. Now, if you do it weekly, it doesn't mean to say that every week there's a sort of meeting running for hours. No, maybe the first few weeks it's relatively long, but at some point it starts to settle down, and maybe the meeting only runs for half an hour or an hour at max. Also, the importance of doing it so regularly is, and I think this is the most important reason, is it helps to keep partners focused on the project and focused on their tasks and actions in the project. The regularity helps ensure partners are made to feel accountable. It's amazing how partners often suddenly address their actions shortly before each meeting. I mean, I include myself with that. If I know that on a certain day, a certain time, there's a meeting, then it's like a little alarm clock telling me, oh, what were the actions I had allocated to me? Have I made sure I've done them? Yeah. The other thing is if you do these regular meetings, I mean, I'll give you an example here of Zoom. If you have a Zoom business subscription, you can use their AI companion to automatically write minutes and actions for your Zoom meetings. Of course, I'm sure with other video conferencing facilities, there's equivalent kind of features. And this is obviously makes life so much easier if the minutes are automatically written and the actions are automatically captured. Yeah, and then the last thing mentioned here, if you're doing it weekly, as a coordinator, you can sort of book the weekly Zoom meeting into the email calendars of the consortium partners. And then they also have this additional prompt shortly before the meetings. So these are some thoughts and ideas about why to do it weekly. On the right hand, this sort of screenshot, this shows the example of the sort of part of an action item list. This was from a project called Fit for NMP. It was funded under Horizon 2020, although in actual fact, it mainly ran at the start of Horizon Europe. There's a project where it was a coordination support action where I was the coordinator. So in short, the project was all about increasing the participation of scientists and organizations from underrepresented regions, mainly widening countries, increasing their participation in nanoscience, nanotechnology, and materials-related projects under Horizon Europe. So anyway, we did this weekly meeting scheme with Zoom. It worked really, really well. By the end of the project, we had over like 35 key performance indicators. We had achieved or exceeded all of them by the end of the project. And this was thanks to having a very good consortium, of course, very strong partners, but also these weekly meetings, it really helped keep their focus on activities. Now, in the action item list for those meetings, we had basically 1 or 2 pages allocated for each work package. And what you see in this screenshot here, this is for work package 2, which is about the organization of innovation workshops. So what I would do for this work package, and indeed for each work package, is first of all, copy and paste from the proposal, or rather from the grant agreement, the details about the number of person months each partner had for that work package. I did that because I wanted to make sure that the partners and also myself were aware, are they involved in this work package? You know, do they have a resource? And if they do, of course, they're meant to be doing something, yeah? Then below that, I copied a part in the grant agreement and the proposal. There was this table showing all the different key performance indicators we had for the different work packages. So anyway, I copied the ones here relevant for work package 2. I show you what the final target is, and then I have a last column, current total, which, as the name suggests, was how much we'd arrived at so far at that particular point in time. And sounds a little detailed, but I would then also, you see the highlighted in yellow. I highlighted indicators in yellow for those where we had not yet reached the final target. So it was a way to quickly see, it's the stuff that needs to be done. Anyway, after those two tables about person months, key performance indicators, I then have this table below where we would actually try to capture specific actions that needed to be done or were being done or were underway, yeah, and what they were and who was responsible for them. So like I said, did this not only for work package 2, for all the work packages. Then when we had the weekly meeting, we wouldn't necessarily go from work package 1 to work package 6. We would be pragmatic. We would know if there were certain up and coming events which were more important, and maybe we just focus our time and effort on those. So anyway, that's some words about regular meetings and action item lists, something you might want to consider yourself, your own projects. So we now move on to talk about deliverables. So in all these Horizon Europe projects, you have deliverables. Much of the time, these are some sort of reports, maybe about some scientific process that's developed, or some prototype or demonstrator, or a survey that's been done, or it all depends. Anyway, what I would suggest here, what you see these three sort of pages here, this is a real example. This is from my QRC for ESP project funded on Horizon Europe. We created with all these projects, we created a simple logo. Then what we've done is we created a standardized deliverable template. You see the cover, it shows the title, what they're meant to put in the deliverable number, the title, who's the lead beneficiary responsible for it, who the actual authors are, etc., etc. In the middle page, it's got some sort of document history, which version number of this document we're up to. And then the third page is a sort of table of contents for the deliverable, and then of course there are subsequent pages for the different sections where the main content is put. Now, what I recommend is for your projects, create a standardized deliverable template, incorporate your project logo in it, make sure this deliverable template is, say, available on the cloud or some sort of repository, online repository, where all the partners can access it. And then, speaking here from the perspective of the project coordinator, obviously as project coordinator, you want to make sure that partners are submitting deliverables on time, that they're preparing them on time, and so forth. What I tend to do is I have a list, obviously, of all the deliverables and their due dates, and at least 2, if not 3 months before the deliverable is due, I send an email reminder to the relevant partner, consulting partner, saying, oh, how's it going with deliverable? You know, you've got this deliverable 1.3 or 3.2, whatever. How the preparation's going. You realize, you know, it's due by 31st of August or whatever. Yeah. Still on the subject of deliverables, so it's really important that you have good quality deliverables. As much as possible, it's best to avoid having them rejected by the Commission because they're not of sufficiently high standard. One way which you can try to ensure quality is to have some sort of schedule where the draft deliverables are reviewed. And this is an example here, this table that you see. This was from my SUSNANO project that we had under Horizon 2020. So what we did there was, with this table, we listed in chronological order from the start of the project onwards the various different deliverables, their number, their title, who was the lead beneficiary responsible for the deliverable, whether it was public or confidential or whatever, when it was due in terms of the month, the due date written in the grant agreement. And then we get into, I'm looking at the third to last column here, where it says delivery production date. We'd indicate a date by which, an internal deadline by which that the partner responsible for the deliverable should make available the full, supposedly finalized draft, the full draft. That full draft deliverable would then be reviewed by other partners not directly connected with the deliverable. So in the second to last column, you see it's partner deliverable reviewers. It was for them to review. And then in the last column, it shows the date by which they need to complete their review and provide their feedback to the responsible partner for the deliverable. So, excuse me, this is a way to try to ensure that the deliverables were of sufficiently good quality. Third slide about deliverables. So all deliverables are submitted to what's called SIGMA, which is short for System for Grant Management. So this is the part of the European Commission's funding and tenders portal where the management of projects is done. It's on SIGMA. Here you see a screenshot. This is from my QRC for ESP project. So you see at the bottom, it's sort of shown in chronological order. These are the various deliverables that we've had in our project. There's a title, a short description, some information about who's the lead partner, what the dissemination level is. It shows the due dates, and then it shows the actual date that we've submitted it. And once each of these deliverables, this is relatively early in the project, once these deliverables have been reviewed by the reviewers appointed by the European Commission, assuming they're deemed of sufficient quality, there's this third to last column. It says approval date. You'll get an approval date appear there once the deliverable has been approved. Slide 4 on deliverables. So it's important to be aware that probably the bulk of deliverables in Horizon Europe are public deliverables, yeah? Meaning, which as the name suggests, they're publicly available. Anybody can go along and download them. If you know where to go, and that is, of course, if you know where to go and look. And the place to go and look is the European Commission's Cordis project database. Now, I mention all this because, especially if you're a relative newcomer to Horizon Europe, the fact that so many deliverables are publicly available is very, very useful for newcomers, because of course you can many of these deliverables, certain types of things like the deliverable for a project website, or about a data management plan, or a dissemination, communication, exploitation plan. They appear time and time again as deliverables in projects. If you can have a chance to go and look how others have done it, of course, that will inform and educate you on what is expected, how to go about write your own such deliverables. So yeah, so there's certain standard deliverables. And I give an example here on the right. So, so what I did was I went to the Cordis project database. You might recall in my training on the initiation phase of module 2, I talked about how you could access the Cordis project database. I suggest if you can't remember, you go and have a look at that. But anyway, I did a search using that, and I wanted to pick an example. So I found another twinning project. SUSNANO, of course, is a twinning project, but here I found another one where it was dealing with digital twins. And here the interesting thing was, not only did I find the project and an abstract and information about the partners and budgets, in the section called results for that project, it showed me details about the deliverables, the public ones. And lo and behold, what do you see? There's this, for example, deliverable about dissemination, exploitation, and communication plan. There's a gender equality report that could be very interesting, data management plan. Any of those I can freely download and read. So just add the QR code you see in the top middle of the screen. If you were to click on that, that would take you directly to this particular example of the twinning project. But there are also plenty of other twinning projects and plenty, obviously, thousands of other Horizon Europe projects. So if you're going to go along and investigate, take your time and do look around. Don't just look at this particular example I give here. I'm sure there are plenty of other examples, quite potentially better, yeah? So enough about deliverables, some words now about milestones. So rather like deliverables, the completion of milestones is recorded in Sigma in the European Commission's Funding and Tenders portal. This screenshot you see here, this is again from my QRC for ESP Horizon Europe project. What you see here, shown in chronological order, are the milestones that we've defined for this project. So there's something like at least 10 of them that are defined. You see the numbering, the title, the work package, the beneficiary. It then shows the due dates by which the milestone should be completed. And in the very sort of last column, you actually write the dates by which the milestone had completed. Now, since many of our milestones are linked to specific deliverables, it's usually a good habit as soon as you submit to the Sigma the related deliverable, at the same time you can go to this part of the portal where you've got milestones documented and straight away and enter the delivery date. Yeah. So that's briefly some words about milestones. It's good to mention about some words about publications. So one of the key things to understand here about any when I say publications, I mean research publications in journals, research papers presented at conferences, posters perhaps presented at conferences, this kind of thing. In all those instances, if the results that are being presented are in some way based on the Horizon Europe project, then it's essential that you acknowledge the Horizon Europe funding somewhere in the journal article, conference paper, or poster, yeah? And in the case, if it's, for example, a conference paper or conference poster, make sure you also not only have the acknowledgement, but you also have this, you see at the bottom left-hand corner, this European flag and this wording funded by the European Union. Now, with the acknowledgement, what are I often get asked, what sort of wording should we use? Well, there's there's several things you can do. You can check your grant agreement. There's an article 17.2 that usually gives you some formal instruction of what should be written. Failing that, you can ask your European Commission project officer to know what formal statement to use. I say this because the wording may change from time to time, but anyway, currently, the formal statement can be something like the following. So in the case of SUSNANO, if you had written a journal article, then at the end section where you say acknowledgements, you'd write something like the research presented in this paper was funded by the European Union under Horizon Europe for the SUSNANO project, in brackets, grant agreement, and then the grant agreement number. Or you might use wording like, we acknowledge the support of the European Union under Horizon Europe for the SUSNANO project. Still on the topic of publications, because these are such important results from EU-funded research projects. The Commission, European Commission, is keen to have this information documented, about the publication. So this information, when you do journal papers are published, conference papers, etc., it's important that you go into Sigma, the online portal, and you put the relevant information about the publication into the system. So look, in this case, this is again for my QRC for ESP project. The screenshot I'm showing you here is from relatively early in the project. So there hadn't been much. There'd only been the one journal article that had been published. You see that listed at the bottom. What I'm trying to get across here is it's good if you sort of update this part of Sigma as you progress with the project. So words now about knowledge management. So with all these Horizon Europe projects, that you're always required to prepare a data management plan according to the European Commission's template. In this data management plan, you're required to define different categories of data that are going to be collected, generated, used, and processed. The categories that the template talks about are the 7 here: public research data, 2 confidential research data, etc., right through to category 7, meeting data. Now, in conjunction with this sort of data management plan, you're going to need to set up some sort of cloud storage and file sharing facility to share data, files, and deliverables between partners. I mean, there are various options available. I know quite often universities have, and large organizations have their own sort of cloud storage. Failing that, you can organize things through Microsoft Teams, Microsoft SharePoint, Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever cloud storage facility you use. Make sure obviously to organize the folders in that file sharing facility, according to work packages, meetings. And what you see on the right here, the lower part, this is an example from a twinning project. Oh, by the way, the QR code above that, if you were to go on that QR code, that will take you directly to the European Commission's template for data management plan. We now move on to talk about, say some words about dissemination, communication, exploitation. So already when I did module 2, and I talked about the planning phase and about writing the section, I think 2.1 or 2.2, where you need to incorporate a dissemination, communication, exploitation plan. Already then, I showed essentially this kind of table here that you see here. This is sort of a summary table of all the different activities, different measures being taken in the context of dissemination, communication, exploitation. So this table, this again comes from my QRC for ESP project. What we did was I took this table and I added an extra column on the right hand side where you see it says period 1. So as the project was progressing, we were tracking the progress with these different indicators, and certainly at the end of period 1, we absolutely had to had to have all these numbers and had to report them to the Commission. So it's a good thing to do as you're progressing during the project. to make sure that you're on track. So, still on the subject of dissemination, communication, exploitation, not only is it important to sort of track the progress you're making against various key performance indicators and sort of tracking in quantitative terms, it's also important that you track across the consortium what are these actual activities, you know, in sort of qualitative terms. What are the names of the event conferences, the workshops they're involved in, summer schools, outreach events. And then what I do for this is I create a simple Excel file, like the one you see on the screen, and I circulate it every so many months amongst the consortium partners and ask them to fill it in. Not only do I ask them to fill it in with like events, conferences, papers that they have done, but I also ask them to sort of give information about forecasted future conferences or forecasted papers. Yeah. This slide here, this is a continuation of this same Excel file. So yeah, information about participating relevant workshops, scientific peer review publications, training, social media, website, press release, and yeah. So it's not only important to have the numbers of these events, but also the details about these events and activities. Because when you come to do your periodic reporting, this information will need to be provided. Which brings me on to perhaps certainly from an administrative point of view, one of the most important aspects of sort of executing and also control of Horizon Europe projects. So there's these things called periodic reviews. I'm going to say some words now about their occurrence, purpose, and reporting. So the occurrence, so with Horizon Europe projects, say 2 to 3 year durations, they're typically divided into two periods, a period 1 and period 2. Projects of longer duration have additional periods, period 3, and so forth. These reviews are about assessing the project progress, so the purpose is to evaluate whether the project is meeting its objectives, milestones, and deliverables as planned. It's about ensuring compliance, so the purpose is to verify adherence to Horizon Europe funding rules, ethical guidelines, and contractual obligations. Monitor budget and resources, so the purpose is to review financial expenditures and resource allocation to ensure efficient use of funds. Identify risks and challenges. The purpose is to detect potential risks, delays, or deviations, and propose corrective actions if needed. Facilitate communication. So the review is also the purpose is to provide an opportunity for beneficiaries and the European Commission to discuss findings, feedback, and future steps. Now, moving now at this point to sort of say some words about the reporting in these periodic reviews. So if you look, let's look first of all to the right. On the right side, you see the cover of a document where it says Horizon Europe, Euratom Research and Training Program, Euratom Periodic Report, and then underneath it, Technical Report Part A, Technical Report Part B, Financial Report, and it says below that version 1.1, 1st of May 2023. Now look, this document, this is the whole guidelines report about how to do the periodic reporting. The QR code in the top right hand corner, if you click on that, they'll take you directly to where you can download this PDF. Now, the several things to understand. Firstly, always make sure you have the latest guidelines. From time to time, they do get updated, and you don't want to be caught out by referring to guidelines that may be 1 year or more out of date. That's one thing. The other thing to sort of grasp is that with the periodic reporting, in essence, there's like 3 parts. There's this technical report part A, technical part B, and the financial report. So with the technical report, part A, this comprises online forms that need to be completed in Sigma, information about the project summary, critical risks, milestones, publications, dissemination activities, etc. In fact, some of those we already covered in earlier slides in this module. The technical report part B. The technical report also often gets referred to as the periodic management report. The technical report provides a comprehensive overview on project progress, project objectives, achievements, deviations, and impact, including scientific and innovation-related progress. The technical report provides explanations of work performed for each work package, use of resources, risk management, and compliance with EC requirements, supported by deliverables and milestones. I should add, this technical report part B, this is where most of the effort, most of the time will be spent preparing for the periodic review. Yeah. The financial report, the third and final here. So things to be aware of. It's important that there's a distinction between financial statements for lump sum funded projects and actual cost funded projects. This is something I talked about at length in module 2 of my training. So with lump sum funded projects, the financial statement confirms the percentage of work packages rather than detailing actual incurred costs, thereby simplifying financial reporting. On the other hand, actual costs funded projects, financial statement here provides a breakdown of actual incurred costs, including personnel costs, travel costs, equipment costs, subcontracting, ensuring they align with the project's budget and Horizon Europe rules. Now, because I said a moment ago, the technical report part B, this is where it's going to consume most of your time and effort in preparing. I want to share with you parts, some sections from a real technical report part B. So what you're seeing here is rather packed on this slide, but you see a number of pages from the technical report that were done for this project Fit for NMP that was funded under Horizon 2020, which I coordinated and which ended at the end of 2023. So this was a coordination support action project. It would take me too long to show you all the pages from that document. There were 49 altogether, but at least I want to show you some of the more important ones, so to speak. So the first thing I want to show is early on in your technical report part B, you'll have some sort of table where you give an overview of the project objectives. So here what I simply did was I listed all the work packages, and for each of those work packages they had their own objectives. And then I had a column where I simply said, you know, is it completed or is it ongoing, and so forth. That was a very quick sort of summary table. In addition to that, though, I would actually write also, I'd ask each of the work package leaders to write for each of their work packages, each of their scientific objectives, sort of 1 or 2 paragraphs concisely saying what's the current status with regard to achieving that objective. So that's what will go on early in the periodic report. After that, you have sections where you have to step through each of the work packages and say relatively concisely what's been done, who's done it, and so forth. Now, here you see in the middle page, this is the example for work package 1. It was a work package dealing with mapping. So it starts off, I've literally copied and pasted from the grant agreement the objectives for this work package. Then underneath that, I've got a short section, main achievements, where I've written in bullet point form what were the main achievements for that particular work package. Then after that, I've copied and pasted the key performance indicator table for that work package. Of course, with the table, I've added an extra column and I'm saying what's the actual target that's been achieved at the end of period 1. After that, you have a section progress per task, and literally for each task, I've copied the title of the task from the work package description in the grant agreement, and I've asked each of the respective task leaders to write concisely what's been done for that task, and that steps through all the tasks in that work package. Then at the end of the section of the work package, it doesn't quite finish there. I have a table. This is now looking at the 3rd page shown on this slide. And here, it's a simple table. For each of the partners who've been involved in that work package, I asked them to write a short few sentences or paragraph saying concisely what it was they actually did for that work package. And the reason for doing this, of course, is because they need to justify, if they're claiming budget for the person month's cost for that work package, they need to be able to demonstrate clearly what they did. Yeah. So if you do this, that's very good. This is what you need to do. This will look very good in your technical report part B. But there's also other information you need to provide. So I'm still showing here now the pages from this same Part B report for the Fit for NMP project. Later on, we have a section 5, deviations from Annex 1 and Annex 2. I should add the Commission and the reviewers are particularly keen to know of any, at the midterm and end of the project, have there been any deviations? Have there been any deviations in tasks? Have there been any deviations in budget? So in this case, for example, with Fit for NMP, we had some minor deviations, work package 1, work package 2, work package 4. And these, in our case, these deviations were in the form that was mainly about deliverables being submitted slightly later than originally foreseen. Now, the thing to do is not only to acknowledge any deviations you have, but obviously to give a short, concise explanation, justification for the deviation. I move now to the page on the right-hand side. So here we have a section 5.2 use of resources. What you'll need to do there is start off by having a table where you show all the different work packages, all the different consortium partners. You say what was the planned consumption of person months for that particular work package for that particular period, for that particular partner. But then you also say, well, in addition to that, what was the real person months booked by that partner for that work package for that particular period? And not only it's good to create a table like that, which you see, but it's also then good if you create some simple bar chart figures where visually and more simply, it's easier to recognize if there have been deviations or not. So if you look in the lower half of that page on the right, we had 2 bar charts. The first one shows like the efforts, in other words, person months per work package at month 18. So this was it showed all the person months for all the partners for a particular work package. It showed what we actually booked versus what was planned. If there was some significant deviation, we would write some explanation. And we wrote here, for example, nearly 20% more person months were booked to work package 1 and then originally planned for period 1. But this was due to the consortium's efforts to identify and register talented newcomers early in the project. Otherwise, for the other work packages, the actual person months booked were comparable to those planned for period 1. The bar chart figure at the very bottom, this one instead is actually showing the efforts, in other words, person months, for each partner at month 18 at the midterm. So this was a summing up of all the person months for all the work packages for each individual partner. And again, If there are any deviations, we write some comments. And I think we wrote here what the actual person months booked by individual partners were comparable to those planned for period 1. So, still on this technical report part B, in this section 5.2, not only do you need to sort of report about the efforts the person months, but you also need to report about the costs that have been incurred by each partner for the different cost categories. Well, sorry, this is at least, in this case, this particular project on the Horizon 2020, it's not a lump sum funded project, it's a reimbursement of actual costs. So if you have a lump sum funded project, it'd be a different story. You just say the percentage completion of each work package by each partner. This table you see here, this is for reimbursement of actual costs. So assuming you have such a project like that on the Horizon Europe, you need to have a table like this, where it shows each partner, the different cost categories, what the budget is for the whole project, what the actual costs have been for that particular period. Then if there's some significant deviation, again, you need to write and explain it. Now, page on the left, page in the middle, these are all the reporting of costs. At the bottom of the page in the middle, we again did some sort of kind of simple bar chart where it said the actual other direct, where we show for each partner what the actual costs have been for each of those different categories. Now, even if you do the most sort of exhaustive kind of technical report, it's really not uncommon that when you do your review, that you're requested to make some further modifications or requested to provide some additional information. And indeed, even with our Fit for NMP project, that was the case. If you look at the third page, page on the right side of this slide, it starts off, it says responses to the European Commission's questions in the suspension of payment letter dated the 4th of October 2022. So if there are any, and it happens very, very frequently, if there's, for any reason, the Commission or the reviewers want you to make some updates to this technical report, then you'll be informed, the coordinator will be informed from Sigma. There'll be some email automatically sent, and they'll be informed of a suspension of payment letter. Now, it sounds, if you've not heard this before, it sounds maybe a little bit scary, but it's nothing to be worried about. What it means is until the Part B is updated satisfactorily, then the process of receiving the midterm payment or final payment is suspended. In our case, this is the midterm report. It says here, so there were it would appear there were two reasons for the suspension. So the first one said the European Commission's question to Intelligenza, to my company, could you please explain the high deviation of the direct personal costs declared as actual costs? So happened at the midterm, we'd booked a substantial amount of personnel costs at that point, but we had reasons. And as you see, we wrote several paragraphs here explaining the reasons why there'd been higher booking at that point. Likewise, there was a second point below down the page. It says European Commission's question to LXI, this was Lux Innovation, one of our consortium partners, foreseen average personnel cost per month in the Annex 1 was lower than the one declared. Could you please explain it? So we gave an explanation for that. These were reasonable explanations, and these updates were rapidly accepted, and the payments subsequently made to the coordinating the consortium partners. So that's quite a lot of words, quite a few slides talking about the periodic reports. Of course, there are three parts to the periodic reporting. We see there's the Part A, the Part B. There's also the financial report, which is what we're going to talk about here. So Financial reporting needs to be done at the end of each project period. As I mentioned already before, usually projects have 2 periods, period 1 and period 2, but they can have more periods in case of projects of longer duration. For example, there's projects of 4 years or more. The financial reports are online financial statements. They must be submitted by each beneficiary, in other words, consortium partner, within 60 days of the end of the project period. There's a distinction between, we have to remember, between financial reporting for lump sum grants and for actual cost grants, in other words, reimbursement grants. So with lump sum funding, financial reporting involves indicating the work packages that have been completed in an online form on the European Commission's funding and tender portal. When I say completion, in fact, you indicate a percentage. So it may be that you indicate 50 or 60 or 30 or 100. It all depends. The interim payments reimburse the eligible lump sum contributions claimed only for completed work packages implemented during the respective reporting periods. The European Commission has said that financial audits will not be conducted because actual costs are not reported in lump sum projects. However, with that said, the dedicated lump sum grant agreement still includes the option of financial audits like any other project on the Horizon Europe. Lump sum beneficiaries are still required to keep the so-called adequate level of records presented officially, in contrast to the actual costs model requirements. With actual cost funding projects, in other words, reimbursement costs, like Fit for NMP, like in fact for my QRC for ESB project under the EIC Pathfinder Open scheme. Here, the financial reporting is done by completing an online form on the European Commission's funding and tender portal. The interim payments reimburse the eligible actual costs claimed during the respective reporting periods. So in practical terms, what does this all mean? So what I'm showing you here, this is a screenshot of a financial statement. This is an example from Horizon 2020 project, although for Horizon Europe, it's also very, very similar if you have a reimbursable cost project. So anyway, if you're at a reporting in the reporting period and it's reimbursable costs, each partner will see something, a financial statement like this. It's for them to fill in the numbers for personnel costs, if they have subcontracting, if they have travel costs, equipment, depreciation of equipment costs, other costs, etc. They need to be put into the relevant cells under the column where it says total amount. Now, not only do they need to do that, and I've marked here on the right in red, they'll also be required to complete certain descriptions of those costs. So, for example, in the case of personnel costs, it's not enough just to indicate the total cost. They'll also need to indicate the person months that have been booked to each of the different work packages. If the, where it says here, let me describe it. If the total purchase costs, if they exceed 15% of the personnel costs, then the surplus, the amount above the 15, that will also need to be described and itemized. And I'll explain more how to do that in a moment. The last thing I need to say, this very large yellow star at the top. So if I was the project coordinator, I really want to make sure that my consortium partners are properly organized and they're ready to do their financial statements. So what I would do is would email the partners project financial signatories, or practices PF sign. These are the people designated by each consortium partner for actually signing off the financial statements. So what I would do, as soon as the project reached the end of a project period, period 1, period 2, whatever, I would email the PF signs for each partner, and I would request them to complete and submit their financial statements at least 2 weeks before the official deadline. So the official deadline is 60 days, 2 months after the end of the project period. In short, I'd want to keep the partners a little bit on their toes. I wouldn't say to them, oh, you can wait all the way to the end of 60 days. Because the thing is, I need to put those numbers, if you recall, into the technical report part B. I don't want to have to be literally squeezed right to the very end of 60 days before I can complete my report. So no, I would tell the partners, PF sides, look, your deadline, our internal deadline is 2 weeks before that. 45 days, in other words. And I'm not saying they all necessarily respect this, but if you get to within 2 weeks before the end of this deadline, the 60-day thing, and they still haven't done it, it gives you a good excuse to go back to them and sort of nag them, encourage them, whatever you want to call it, to make sure they do the necessary reporting, the financial statement. So some specific words about the reporting of costs. This is again the context for a project where it's about reimbursable costs, actual costs. This what I'm saying here is not about lump sum funded projects. So look, firstly, personnel costs. I mean, they're going to be invariably probably the biggest cost that you'll have in your project. So you want to make sure that you do it correctly. Now with personnel costs, not only do you have to report the cost, but as I said earlier on, also in the description, you're going to need to provide information about the number of person months booked to each work package. So in order to calculate, figure out what is meant by a person month, please, you should follow this sort of calculation here. So first thing to be aware of is, so for personnel costs for each person, it's their daily rate times by the days worked on the project. Daily rate equals their actual annual personnel costs for that person divided by 215. That's one thing to be aware of. How do you convert their hours? Because most of them will be doing timesheets, booking hours per week, per month. How do you convert those hours into person months? Well, look, you take the total hours that they worked on a particular work package or work packages, you divide that by this number 1,720, you then divide it by further by 12. That will then give you effectively convert their hours into person months. Okay, or more simply, take their hours, the total hours they've worked on the project or the person month on the particular work package, divide it by 143.33. That tells you the person months. So yes, they indicate the person months booked to each work package during the period, e.g. work package 1, 8.4 person months, work package 2, 21.3, and so on and so forth. If you do have subcontracting costs, well, first you have to be really careful to check if it's subcontracting or not. Simply another example of a purchasing cost. But if you do have subcontracting costs, not only do you indicate the cost in the relevant cell in the financial statement, but in the description, you should make sure you indicate the name of the contractor, the service they provided, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice. Of course, the date needs to fall within the relevant project period. And make sure you also give a reference to the section in the Part B, the description of action of the grant agreement, where the project will have described subcontracting costs for your project. If you do those things, then you won't have any problems with the commission. It'll should get accepted very, very quickly and smoothly. Moving on now to talk about other costs that you will report. So purchase costs, I would say after personnel costs, the most common ones you'll have will be purchase costs. And there, of course, there are different examples of those. First thing to note is you only need to describe purchase costs if the total sum of those purchase costs exceeds 15% of the total personnel costs for that beneficiary. The description is only required for the amount above that, and then even then, if it exceeds 15%, you only need to give description the amount above 15%. So let's imagine a concrete example. Imagine if you had total purchase costs, there were 16,000 euros, and you had total personnel costs of 100,000 euros. Then you would need to give a description would be required for at least 1,000 euros of purchase costs. You know, obviously 15% of the 100,000 is 15,000, so you've got a delta of 1,000. That's the minimum amount you need to describe. If you do trigger this 15% limit, then it's really up to you. I mean, it depends how many different purchase costs you have. You might have a mixture of travel, equipment depreciation, research consumables. Anyway, it's up to you to describe which ones you choose to describe. The only condition is you need to describe enough to cover this minimum requirement. Now, if it so happens to be travel and subsistence costs, in the description, what you'll need to, in order to be accepted, you'll need to indicate the names of the experts, the destination they went to, the dates of the trip. Remember, those dates must fall within the relevant project period. The purpose of the trip, so in other words, and reference the work package task to which the trip relates to. If you do that, your cost claim should be accepted very smoothly. If it's equipment cost you're describing, so you'll need to indicate the name of the supplier of the equipment, the name of the equipment, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice, indicate the amount of depreciation over the reporting period, and reference the section in Part B of the grant agreement where it's indicated the project would have equipment costs. If it's other goods, for example, research consumables, in the description indicate the name of the supplier, the name of the goods, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice, and reference the section in Part B of the grant agreement where the project said it would have other goods costs. Works and services, such as catering, if you're going to be describing those, make sure you indicate the name of the supplier, the name of the service, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice, and the reference, the section of the Part B of the grant agreement where it is indicated that the project would have such costs, would have works and services costs. And then lastly, other cost categories, e.g. internally invoiced goods and services, indicate the name of the supplier, the service provided, the amount of the invoice, the date of the invoice, and reference the relevant section in Part B of the grant agreement. So, last word about financial reporting. So, this is for any beneficiary, any consortium partner in a Horizon Europe project. If they have total costs, in other words, the sum of their direct costs and indirect costs, if they exceed 430,000 euros, then they will need what's called a certificate of the financial statement, i.e. an audit certificate. Now, this certificate of the financial statement, it must be issued by a qualified auditor using the European Commission's template. I've done involve the European Commission's template. It's absolutely essential that the auditor uses this. They can't use their own. If they use any other kind of description template for this certificate of the financial statement, it will simply be rejected. Okay. In order to download the template, and I should say this template consists of not only there's terms of reference, which the auditor has to sort of sign off on, and there's also the model of the certificate itself. Now, the QR code on the right, if you click on that, that'll take you to where you can download the template with the terms of reference and the model. The auditor, when they do the audit, they'll need to indicate if there's been any irregularities and errors in their report. The EU European Commission funding agency is responsible for deciding of any consequences if there's errors. This certificate of financial statement, once it gets issued by the auditor, you'll need to make sure you have a PDF copy created of it, and you'll need to upload it to the Sigma portal. Saying all this, I now look at this bright yellow star at the top of the slide. So again, I'm thinking from the perspective of being a project coordinator. I want to make sure that all the financial statements, all the audit reports, certificates, etc., if they're required, that everything is done well on schedule, because I know that this, at the end of the project, we've got a 60-day limit. Everything is meant to be completed by then. So I want to make sure that, especially for those partners who need a certificate of financial statement, that they're thinking sufficiently in advance to prepare for this. So I've written here, at least 2 to 3 months before the official end of the project, I would write to the partners with budgets in excess of 430,000 euros and urge them to contract an accounting firm to audit their financial statements as soon as the project ends. I really emphasize as soon as the project ends. I've often encountered situations where some of the partners, they just don't wake up till the project's ended and only then start thinking about getting an auditor. So there's delays in trying to contract an auditor, delays in the auditor actually doing the work, delays in getting it uploaded. And the problem is you can't complete your reporting. It's very difficult to complete your reporting and to get your final payment until you have financial statements, certificates on financial statements, which have been accepted for the whole consortium. Invariably, it's like the saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. I don't know, the completeness of your reporting is only as strong as the weakest, the slowest reporting partner, so to speak. Yeah. So as a coordinator, you're always trying to think in advance. What can I do? How can I make sure that partners are reacting sufficiently in time? So last word here about periodic reportings, or rather now periodic reviews. So not only do you have to do all these elaborate reports, the part B, the part A, and the financial statements, you'll normally also be requested to have a project review. Now, and at the midterm and at the end. So usually written here in bullet point form, usually required to present the project's progress at project review meeting and this is usually about 2 months after the end of the project period. The review is done by the EC project officer with the support of 1 to 3 independent experts, also known as reviewers. The project review meetings are done online. Before we had COVID-19, they were often held in Brussels. The European Commission project officer will usually ask you to propose an agenda for a half a day. This is in case of a coordination support action, or possibly a full day if it's a research and innovation action or innovation action for the project review. In a moment, I'll talk about what you see on the right side, but let's finish off the bullet points. So for this review meeting, make sure your work package leaders are using standardized slide presentation templates. I think there's nothing worse than having sort of review and different work package leaders following different styles. You just don't look so much of a coordinated collaborative effort if you do that. In addition to that, make sure that the content that your work package leaders are putting into the slides, that it's consistent with what is written in the technical report, in other words, the part B. It's okay to say the scientific and technical work packages, if maybe they give some additional information about the results, maybe some additional graphs, figures, this kind of thing, but in essence, what they're presenting should still be consistent with Part B technical report. Another word of advice: make sure the consortium holds a practice dress rehearsal, the review meeting before the actual review. So this is quite a common thing. A few days beforehand, have an online Zoom meeting or Teams meeting where each of the work package leaders presents their slides, and then the other partners critique them as if they were reviewers themselves. On the right-hand side, this is an example. This is from my Fit for NMP project. This was the online review meeting we had at the midterm. Fairly simple agenda. This is how we defined it, how we structured it. I give it here as an example because usually, well, almost always the European Commission project officer will ask you to provide a draft agenda for your review. So this is an example that you might want to use. So we've moved away from project reviews, periodic reporting. Some words about budget flexibility. So in these projects, so consortium partners often ask me if they can transfer budget between cost categories. For example, transfer budget from travel costs to personnel costs. Now, the answer for this is the following. So for Horizon Europe actual cost funded projects, in other words, reimbursable costs, the answer is yes to this question. You can transfer budget between cost categories. There's an Article 5.5 of the grant agreement, which you see on the right-hand side here under the heading budget flexibility. So note that one can make transfer between budget categories and also between partners, provided, as long as this doesn't imply any substantive or important change to the description of action in Annex 1. Note that Article 5.4 above, it refers to an estimated budget. So the Commission anticipates, it is, in essence, it's normal that whatever budget each partner has in the project, they may not spend it all. Another partner might spend more. There's usually some variability. It's an estimation. So that's for actual cost-funded projects. But if you have a Horizon Europe spelling mistake here, a lump sum funded project, can you transfer budget between cost categories? Well, the answer is no. It would require a grant amendment. However, pause for a moment. Usually there's no real need to transfer between budget categories, but maybe between partners, yeah, because it's just the way the nature of the lump sum funded project, yeah. Last sort of things to talk about here in terms of execution and control. So grant amendments. So grant amendments, it's really not uncommon within the context of Horizon Europe projects that some changes might need to be made. They may need to be formally documented. Although you've got this flexibility with budgets, there may be some other aspects where you need to change things. So here are some potential reasons for making an amendment. Changing consortium composition, the withdrawal or adding a beneficiary, consortium partner, affiliated entity or associated partner, that's a common reason. Extension of project duration, requesting additional time due to unforeseen delays or force majeure. Maybe a modification of the work plan, updating deliverables, milestones or tasks due to scientific or technical reasons. Budget and cost reallocation, so adjusting budget distribution between beneficiaries or cost categories. And then lastly, maybe there's a change of legal or financial status, updating details if a beneficiary undergoes a legal name change, merges or faces financial issues. Now, I'm going to pick the first two from this example risk, that arguably the more common grant amendments you might encounter, and talk a little bit more in detail about what it means. So if we take the example of withdrawing a consortium partner. So A classic one might be that you have a private company, a startup company or an SME that maybe has gone bankrupt. That's not so uncommon. If you have that situation, then you need to initiate the request for the grant or amendment in the funding and tenders portal. The coordinator or the withdrawing partner submits a termination request through the grant management system. There was Sigma on the funding and tenders portal. You need to provide justification supporting documents. The request must include a clear reason for termination, potential impacts on the project, a relevant supporting documents, e.g. consortium agreement justification letter. There'll need to be an update to the grant agreement work plan, so the consortium must propose necessary amendments to redistribute the departing partners' remaining tasks and budget, ensuring project continuity. They'll need to be approved by the European Commission. The EC reviews the requests, assessing risk and project viability before approving or rejecting the termination. And then there's last bullet point here, formalization of the termination. If approved, the grant agreement is amended and the termination is officially recorded, including final cost claims and reporting for the withdrawing partner. A second very common example of a grant amendment is about extending the project duration. You need to initiate the amendment request in the funding and tenders portal. The project coordinator submits a formal amendment request through the grant management system, in other words, Sigma. They need to provide justification. A detailed explanation must be included outlining the reasons for the extension. Now, I've written here in brackets, so reasons for extension, e.g. delays, unforeseen circumstances, technical challenges, and the risk of not passing project milestone. So I put this in bold because if you're really trying to make this request, from my personal experience, there are plenty of situations where the project officer of the commission says no, they reject. But you will have a much stronger chance of your request being accepted if you can tie the request to the risks of not passing project milestone. So you need to look through your project milestones, documenting the grant agreement, identify the ones or several which are at risk, and relate and justify your request to the potential of failing to meet those. Assuming you've done this, provide this justification, update the grant agreement and work plan. The revised timeline must be reflecting the project's deliverables, milestones, and reporting schedule. By the way, yeah, if you're requesting an extension of duration, the European Commission usually only allows a 6-month extension. The only times where I've seen it to be longer was when we had the COVID pandemic and where the Commission allowed extensions of 1 year duration. But that was really an exception. Otherwise, usually what I've seen is 6 months is like the maximum. If you're doing this, the consortium agreement and partner approval of applicable consortium partners must also agree on the extension before submission. The European Commission does a review and approval. The EC assesses the requests, ensuring project feasibility and funding implications before approving or rejecting the amendment. And then lastly, formalization of the amendment. If approved, the updated grant amendment is signed electronically and the new project timeline is officially recorded. So, dear SUSNANO colleagues, that concludes what I want to say about the execution of control phase. We now move, fortunately, more briefly onto this closing phase. So some things to think about in the closing phase of your Horizon Europe project. Well, we're going to do like a checklist. So final reporting and deliverables. Make sure you submit the final technical and financial reports via Sigma, the EC's funding and tenders portal. Ensure deliverables and milestones are completed and documented. Financial closure, submit final cost claims and justification of expenditures, which we already covered. Ensure compliance with eligibility rules and audit requirements. Review and assessment and participate in the final project review with the European Commission or external evaluators, reviewers, address any feedback or additional requests from the European Commission. Dissemination exploitation, make sure you finalize and publish project results, data sets, and scientific publications. Ensure long-term sustainability and exploitation of project outcomes. Also, to be considered with the closing phase, intellectual property and data management. So make sure you finalize any agreements you might have on intellectual property rights and data sharing. Ensure compliance with open science and fair data principles. In other words, make sure those research publications are available in open access repositories. Archiving and record keeping, so make sure you maintain your project records for at least 5 years or as required by the European Commission. Ensure availability of documents for potential audits or reviews. And then lastly, project closure and next steps. So officially close the project and funding and tenders portal. Plan any follow-up initiatives, collaborations on funding applications with your partners, consortium partners. Write up a learning log on what went well, what didn't, and other advice for future projects. So, dear SUSNANO colleagues, it's been a pleasure presenting you this module 3. This concludes the training that I'm giving on EU project management and more specifically the project life cycle for Horizon Europe projects. For those of you that are about to write proposals, I hope Module 2 gives you some good ideas to help you write competitive proposals. For those of you fortunate enough to be involved in currently running or soon to start Horizon Europe projects, I hope that the slides and the training I've given here in Module 3 will help you to manage and to run those projects that little bit more smoothly and so on. Okay. Wish you all the very best, and I hope to see many of you at some point in the future. All the best. Bye-bye.